So, something as we were worshiping, the Lord just gave me a download. And as far as I can remember, and I'm happy for you to correct me if I'm remembering wrong, but there are only 2 times when Jesus talks about people that will be remembered, forever for what they did. And those 2 people were women. And one of them we spoke about this morning, the woman giving the widow's mite. Ruth shared about her. And remember, Jesus talked about what she'd done, will be always talked about. And tonight's story is the other woman that Jesus talked about. And it's Mary, and Mary's gift of her alabaster jar. And isn't it interesting that the 2 people that Jesus talked about were not men, which was very significant in his time, because women were not really considered important in, the culture of the time. And more than that, it was their giving that was really important. And, women weren't seen as people who, had the money to give. It was the men who controlled everything. And yet here is 2 stories about women who gave. And Jesus particularly highlights these 2 stories and says what they've done will be remembered forever and always talked about. And so we're going to look at Mary's story tonight. And it begins in Mark 14. Now, there are a couple of stories about Jesus being anointed, and it's interesting that both of them talk about Simon, but I believe they are separate stories. One was Simon, who was a Pharisee, a leader, and the other was Simon the leper. Now, I assure you that a Pharisee would not have been a leper. And so I am certain that these are separate stories, and there are significant differences in the stories. And so we're going to talk about this one in Mark 14, 1 to 11. So let's just read that together, Mark 14, 1 to 11. Now the Passover and the festival of unleavened bread were only 2 days away, and the chief priests and the teachers of the law were scheming to arrest Jesus secretly and kill him. But not during the festival, they said, or the people may riot. Now, this is really important to understand. The men in Jesus' life were planning how to betray him. The women in Jesus' life were giving everything to him. And so it is a significant understanding to have in this story what actually bookends both sides of this story. Because at the beginning, we have the Pharisees and the priests, the teachers of the law, plotting how to betray and kill Jesus. But let's see what happens at the end of this story. So while he was in Bethany, reclining at the table in the home of Simon the leper, a woman came with an alabaster jar of very expensive perfume made of pure nard. She broke the jar and poured the perfume on his head. Some of those present were saying indignantly to one another, "Why this waste of perfume? It could have been sold for more than a year's wages and the money given to the poor." And they rebuked her harshly. Has anyone ever been rebuked harshly by someone else, put down, told they're no good, whatever, for what they did? Here is this woman giving this beautiful gift to Jesus, and she is rebuked harshly. And we read in other Gospels that it was even the disciples that were rebuking her. "Leave her alone," said Jesus. "Why are you bothering her? She has done a beautiful thing to me. The poor you will always have with you, and you can help them anytime you want, but you will not always have me. She did what she could. She poured perfume on my body beforehand to prepare for my burial. Truly I tell you, wherever the gospel is preached throughout the world, what she has done will also be told in memory of her." Then Judas Iscariot, one of the 12, went to the chief priests to betray Jesus to them. They were delighted to hear this and promised to give him money, so he watched for an opportunity to hand him over. In fact, we read about Judas even saying this money should have, been put in the offering bag type thing, because he actually stole from the offering bag. That Judas kept the money and he stole from it. And so here he is, one of Jesus' disciples, going to betray Jesus. So we see either end of this story, men in Jesus' life, the religious leaders of the day and one of Jesus' own disciples, trying to betray and kill him. significant, isn't it, that this story is between those two accounts? Between the plotting of the chief priests and the teachers of the law and the plotting of one of Christ's own disciples, Judas, we have this beautiful picture of devoted love. One of the most moving scenes in our Lord's life was sandwiched between the implacable hatred of religious man. There is a debate over who this woman is, but I believe her to be Mary of Bethany, the sister of Lazarus and Martha. And I truly believe that this is who it was. And when we think of what had happened to Mary, she was the woman who sat at Jesus' feet. Remember, Martha's very busy in the house, and there's Mary sitting at Jesus' feet. Mary was the one whose brother Lazarus was raised from the dead after being 4 days in the tomb. Remember, Jesus came, and Martha and Mary are there. They're weeping, they're crying, and Jesus goes to the tomb and raises Lazarus from the dead. Can you imagine the joy and the love in Mary's heart for Jesus? Not only has she sat at his feet, and when her sister came to criticize her for that, Jesus refused to take that from her. But then he goes to the ends and raises her brother from the dead. So she has a deep and abiding love for this man of God, this servant of God, Jesus. And it was custom in Israel to anoint someone's head with a few drops of oil. If they were someone of importance or someone you respected, someone of value to you, you would just put a few drops of oil on their head. But this oil was usually just oil worth a few cents. You know, it wasn't costly oil. It was more of just a custom, and it wasn't a lot of money that was spent on it. But not Mary. She had sat at Jesus' feet. She had seen him raise her brother Lazarus to life after being buried 4 days in a tomb. Not the gift of a few cents for her Jesus. Love, extravagant love, is a response from someone who has known what it is to be loved. And I think often our lack of extravagant love for Jesus is because we haven't understood how much we're loved by him, how much he has done for us, and what that really means. Once again, I refer back to Paul's prayer in Ephesians 3, that we may have power together with all the saints to know the depth, the height, the width, the breadth of his love for us. When we understand the love of Christ, we want to give everything for him. When I was in Youth with a Mission, they said, you want to go bananas for Jesus. That was the way they put it. And there's like this sense that I just want to do anything for him. And here's Mary in this place, you know, and there's Jesus. And I believe she senses something is about to happen. She doesn't know Jesus is going to the cross. Come on, but she senses something is going to happen. That's just prophetically in her spirit, something is rising up. And when we are close to Jesus, when we sit at his feet, we sense what is happening in his heart. And Jesus was so close to Mary. She was so close to him that I believe that she understood something was about to happen. And this was the moment, this was the opportunity that she had. And if she waited, she might not have this chance to give this gift. And so she comes extravagantly to give this gift. She knew that her gift, even though it was worth a year's wage, was nothing compared to what Jesus had done for her. And indeed, what he was about to do on the cross. Well, what is an average wage in Australia for a year? What do you think? 60,000, 50,000? I don't know. What do you think? Yeah, it could even be higher, right? Can you imagine a bottle of perfume worth like $50,000, $60,000? In fact, one of my friends did some research, and he rang up Myers and he asked Myers what was the most expensive bottle of perfume that they sold, and it was a $6,000 bottle of perfume, and it was a undiluted fragrance. And so this bottle of perfume, you would put a few drops in water and then you would spray that on you. So, you know, it was a very highly intense scent that had to be diluted with water. And this fragrance that Mary had was made from nard. Now, I'm going to give you an understanding of nard, because this is how you're going to understand why this stuff was worth so much. So nard is is from a flower that grows on the slopes of the Himalayan mountains. The only place to get this flower is kind of where Mount Everest is. And so, can you imagine in Jesus' time, they didn't have, like mountaineering trips to Everest like we have today. People go and try and climb Everest. The only place to find nard was on the slopes of the Himalayan mountains. And so to travel there and to get this flower and to bring it back and make perfume, can you imagine what people had to go through to get this flower? And that's why it was worth so much, because it was so rare. And so this perfume was worth $60,000, $70,000. Maybe it was an heirloom, I don't know. Maybe it was a gift passed on to her. But it was her treasure. It was her biggest treasure. This was perfume made from nard, as I've talked to you about. It was undiluted, designed to be used a few drops or mixed in water and not to be just the whole bottle, poured on someone. But what Mary did was not just a few drops, but it says that she actually broke the jar. She broke it. There was no going back. There was no like putting this back in the jar or, taking it and filling the jar back up. There was no going back. And this wasn't a cheap jar. It was an alabaster jar. It was an expensive jar. And she broke this jar. She was saying, there's no way I'm going back. This is all given. The perfume, the jar. It reminds me of Elijah when he was up on the mountain and he called all the people to come to watch this battle between him and the gods of, God Baal. And he said, whoever answers with fire is the true God. And he builds this altar. And remember, it has been 3 years and no rain. 3 years and no rain. And what does he ask them to do? To get 12 pitchers, like huge jars of water. Can you imagine? It was probably there to help feed the thousands of people gathered to give a drink to the thousands of people gathered. Maybe it was the only water they had. And he says, get this water and pour it over the altar. Just pour it. No rain for 3 years. And then he takes this water. Imagine the value of that resource at that moment. And so I believe why Jesus emphasizes giving of the widow with her mite and this giving of Mary is because giving extravagantly, whether you have much or little, because both were extravagant giving, that the widow gave from all she had to live on, Mary gave her most prized possession, are an act of faith. You are giving what you have and you're saying, God, I'm in your hands. I have nothing now because everything is yours. And so that act of faith pleases God. Remember, without faith, it is impossible to please God. And so if our giving does not stretch us, if our giving to God does not require faith on our behalf, it's not really an extravagant gift of love. It's just a gift of obligation. Okay, I give this because I'm obligated to do something in giving, not because it comes from my heart responding to God's love. Mark Hankins calls it giver's remorse. So a month later, you're still thinking, should I have given that much? So this giver's remorse. You've given an extravagant gift when a month later you're still thinking, man, was that the right thing to do? You're still thinking about how big that gift was. And it's everything you have and you bring it to God and you give it in faith. And that's what Mary had done. And so Mary did not hesitate at the cost of this impulsive act of love. And in a moment in time, she spent more than $60,000 seemingly for no useful purpose. A few drops would have done to anoint Jesus' head. This was not some, weak perfume. It was the most expensive perfume you could imagine. A few drops would have anointed his head. She poured the whole thing, broke the jar. There was no need for it. It seemed like a useless act of wastage. Now, there are some onlookers, people that you might expect to support this act of extravagant love. Who were they? The disciples of Jesus. The friends and family maybe the friends and family of Mary wouldn't be so excited about the gift, but you would think that the disciples, having been with Jesus 3 years now, having fallen in love with him, having been taught by him, would have thought, wow, this is awesome. Someone is giving like this to Jesus. But you know what? It threatened their own giving. It threatened what they had done in their own heart. And you know, I see them in their own head thinking, I haven't really given anything like that. And I'm a disciple. And here's Mary, you know, someone on the fringes, and she's given this, and it challenged them in their heart. And what is the response? That pride rises up, and you become defensive, aggressive, and you attack the person. And that's what they did. They assessed her gift, and we read in verse 4 how they assessed her gift. They were saying indignantly to one another, "Why this waste of perfume?" Verse 5, "It could have been sold for more than a year's wages and the money given to the poor," and they rebuked her harshly. Not just, you know, a little kind of snide joke or a little criticism. They rebuked her harshly. So I don't believe the Bible even tells us everything they said at that time. I believe they were actually really angry and really telling her off. You know, this woman cursing her for what she'd done. They were talking about this sheer extravagance of this. Why was she so lavish when a few drops would have sufficed? You see, to them it was a matter of profit and loss. But to Mary, it was the supreme moment of her life where she could give something to Jesus. And you know, I've had the beautiful treasure of seeing people come to me, and I see a gift they bring, and I know at that moment they're giving something to Jesus, and it is this moment in time when they have brought a gift, and it's with all their heart, and it's extravagant, and they're giving it, and the joy that's in their heart, and the tears that are flowing from their eyes as they give it. And I've seen it, and I've had the privilege to view that, and it is so beautiful. It's because you can feel the love in that person for Jesus. It's just flowing out of them. And they bring this gift and they give it, and it's like, you know that they don't have that. You know that they really can't afford it, but they have brought it to Jesus because the love for him is so real that they just want to give to him. They just want to give everything they have. And that was Mary. You know, they were counting the profit and loss, but for her it was this supreme moment where she could avow her pure love for the Lord. Where she could say with this one gift, Jesus, I love you. Love is not enough for me to say, Jesus, I have to just give something. And it wasn't because Jesus required it of her. It wasn't because Jesus asked it of her. It was because she was responding to his love. How can you measure that? You can't. Yet, I think often we measure our dollars and cents. We kind of like get to, okay, what's 10% of this, or what's 15%, or whatever we've decided to give, 20%, I don't know. Whatever you've decided in your heart to give, and you measure it out, and you I know some people, because I see the giving that comes in the banking, and sometimes they'll give like 5 cents or 10 cents, they'll give an amount, $100.10 or something, and you can tell they've worked out the exact amount of, man, just round it up or round it down, it's like, it's like they're counting every cent. Okay, I'm going to give this 10%, and or whatever it is they've decided to give, and it's right to the cent. Had Mary used, come on, listen to this. This is really important. This is a very significant part of this story. Had Mary used only a few drops of perfume, as they suggested, this story would have never been passed down. Think of the millions and millions of dollars given into God's kingdom, given to the work of God because of this story. And if she had just given a few drops, this story wouldn't exist. It wouldn't have been highlighted. But this gift that was given, this extravagant gift, has been passed on, as Jesus said. It will be told, from generation to generation of what she has done. And think of what the work of God has been done through that gift. And if she had just done as they suggested, what would have been missed for generations and generations of Christians in giving because they did not have Mary's example of the alabaster jar. It's a beautiful, beautiful understanding. This supreme moment in her life was also a supreme moment in history. A supreme moment in the giving of the kingdom of God. Think how it affected generations after generations. The widow who gave her mite, how her few cents, how it affected generations of giving. You see, these moments of giving are not just something that is between us and God. Spiritually, they're doing something. They're doing something in the kingdom. They're doing something in the spiritual battle we're facing. Come on. Because, we're not facing flesh and blood. And, we count our money, we count our gifts because it's physical. And we're not understanding that it's actually a spiritual gift that's happening. It's a spiritual attack on the gates of fear in our life when we give that. It's like the devil coming to you and say, don't give that $10 in your pocket. And you say, well, I'll give the 100 if you keep talking to me. Like, I'll show you, I'll give the other 100. It's like you just destroy fear in your life because it's like, God, you've got it. I'm just dependent on you here. And suddenly you're just released from the fear of money or lack because you're in God's hands and He's faithful. And Mary had seen Jesus raise her brother from the dead. She had sat at His feet. She'd heard Him teach. She'd seen His love for her. She had no doubt in her heart that giving this gift would bring something beautiful. And she had no idea what it would do. But if she had chosen just to do a few drops, this story would not have significance. I wonder how many stories, and I want to challenge you with this, I wonder how many stories have been lost because we hesitated to show our love for Christ in a similar way. Think of this story. If she'd hesitated, if she hadn't broken the jar, if she'd just done a few drops, that story would have been lost. And I wonder how many stories, generation after generation, have been lost because we hesitated. We doubted, we were afraid, and we didn't respond out of love. We responded out of fear in our giving. Her gift has led many to come and also pledge their gift to Jesus. Do we calculatingly add up our gifts to Him, carefully measuring out the expenditure of time and strength we devote to the interest of His kingdom? His heart aches for the abandonment of love, and His work languishes when it doesn't come, when it is absent. God gave extravagantly on the cross through Christ. And, when we're in a relationship, husband and wife, it is a delight to give extravagantly in that relationship. I remember when we had our 25th anniversary this year, and I planned this big surprise. I don't have time to tell you all about it tonight, but it was like I just wanted to give something extravagant to this woman that God had given me for 25 years. And, I planned this big surprise. Money was no issue. It was just, not that we had money, but, I just was determined that this was going to be fantastic. It was going to be an extravagant gift. And the gift that Rose has given me over 25 years of marriage, her love, her constant attention to the care of our family, her care for the spiritual maturing of our family, her constant, referring us back to prayer as a family, to reading the Bible, to being one as a family. You cannot measure that. And when we understand the extravagance of God's love, when we truly get it, we'll want to give back extravagantly to Him. But do you think, even though God doesn't need anything, what do you think it does to His heart when He sees an extravagant gift come back? And I'm not being unscriptural in this. Remember the 10 lepers. And Lily, I thought of you this morning when you came to me and you thanked me for praying and speaking into your life. And there were 10 lepers, and you probably haven't read this story in the Bible yet, but there were 10 lepers and Jesus healed them all. But only one came back and said thank you. And I've spoken to many people. I've prayed for many people, Lily, and especially new believers, and very few of them ever come back like you did today and say thank you. And I want to appreciate you for that. It really encouraged me. And so thank you for that. And sometimes the hours, the time you give as a pastor in a church, it's often a thankless job, and when someone makes that effort to come and thank you, Deb, you're always encouraging me, thank you for that. When someone makes that effort to encourage you, it is so beautiful, and it's very, very precious. And I feel that God is like that. He highlighted the leper. Jesus highlighted the leper. He said, where are the other 9? Why has only one returned to give thanks? So God is looking at our gratitude. God is looking at our gratitude and our thankfulness in our heart, And He does look at that. Not that He needs it, but it is a true representation of our love for Him. Do we have an extravagant love for Him as a disciple of Jesus, or do we just have an obligated love for Him? And that's the question we need to ask ourselves. And our giving will often reflect whether our love for Him is out of obligation or out of just a response in extravagance to His goodness in our life. 2 Samuel 24:24 tells a story about David, and I just want to briefly go there. David has sinned, and he did an act of pride. He counted all of the fighting men of Israel, and it was an act of pride because he wanted to know and understand how vast his army was. And God was quite upset with David's pride in his heart when he did this. And God gives David 3 options. And David picks the third option, which is, for God's, wrath to come, because he says God will be merciful, but man will not. And so he picks God. And at the very height of this disaster that is coming on Israel because of David's sin, the angel of the Lord is standing over Jerusalem, about to destroy the city. And God says, stay your hand. I have mercy on my people. And so David goes to this threshing floor, this place, and where the angel stood and stayed his hand. And he wants to make a sacrifice to God. He wants to sacrifice something on this altar here. And so we read in verse 24. Well, let's take it from 22. Araunah said to David, let my lord the king take whatever he wishes and offer it up. Here are oxen for the burnt offering, and here are threshing sledges and ox yokes for the wood. Your majesty, Araunah gives all this to the king. Araunah also said to him, may the Lord your God accept you. So here's Araunah. He's saying, you can have it. Take my threshing floor, take my oxen, take the yoke, take everything. I give it to you to make this sacrifice. And David says in verse 24, but the king replied to Araunah, no, I insist on paying you for it. I will not sacrifice to the Lord my God burnt offerings that cost me nothing. And how often have we as the people of God sacrificed ourselves for God things that cost us nothing? And the work of God has been held back because the people of God have been not willing to pay for the cost. I remember Rodney Howard-Browne, when he first came to America, he needed a car, and he'd been waiting like almost a year for this car, and he said, God, I need a car. I'm traveling all around America. I'm bringing my family. He wasn't asking for a plane. He was asking for a car. And God said, I've already... do you remember how many people it was he asked? Sorry, 7. Yeah, I've spoken to 6 people and they all said no. And I'm just about to speak to the 7th, to get this car to Rodney. And so God had spoken to 6 people over that course of that 9 months or whatever to give the car, and none of them had done it. They all said no. And the work of God was being held up because the people of God were not giving what God was asking them to give. And then the 7th person did it. And so Rodney said, God, when you come to me, may I never, ever say no to you. may I never, ever say no to you. And so David here is showing us that when we give to God, it should cost us something. It shouldn't be just, something that we give, the loose change in our pocket. I mean, remember Cain and Abel. Abel brought the best fruits, the first fruits, but his best offering to the Lord. But Cain just grabbed whatever he could, just grabbed an onion here and a pumpkin there and just threw it on the altar, and it was not acceptable to the Lord. It was not acceptable because it cost him nothing. When we're disciples of Jesus, we want to give everything for him, everything for the work of God, because we know that he will protect us, he will cover us. What did Jesus say? Seek you first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. So we need to trust that or not trust it. There's no kind of middle ground there. We either trust it or we don't trust it. Is he going to be faithful? Is he going to provide or not? David sets the bar here when he refuses to accept Araunah's gift of the threshing floor. Shall I give to the Lord that which cost me nothing? And I think sometimes we're waiting for someone else to give the gift. I've seen this in pledges for the church and giving, and you can see people are waiting to see if the amount's been met, and they're waiting to see if others are going to give before they give, because they think, is it going to be met? Then I won't have to make a pledge, because if it's actually met, then I won't have to give. And so they're waiting for someone else to do the work that God's called them to do. And it's significant in my heart that we would even count that. I just want to give. And I just, God, whatever you're laying on my heart, I'm going to do it, because I know that that's where the blessing is. That's where your purpose is going to be. And there's no point holding anything back for myself, because I'd rather have the blessing on everything I give than keep everything and have no blessing. Because what's the point of that? I'm doing it in my own strength. So the second thing they said, the first was that it was, sheer extravagance. The second was that it was waste. The disciples said it was waste. Why not do something useful in verse 5? I know it says verse 4 in your notes. It should say verse 5. Why not do something useful with the money? You could sell it on the market. Hey, go to eBay. Put it on Gumtree. Get some cash for that sucker. We could do something with 60 grand, Man, we could feed the poor, or pay off our debt, or buy food for a crowd of people. Remember, it was going to cost a year's wages to feed the crowd of 5,000, and plus all that. You could feed a whole crowd with that. Let's go to eBay. Mary, what are you doing? It's a waste. You could have just used a few drops. Jesus was not indifferent to the poor. In fact, most of his ministry was to them, their physical and spiritual needs. So Jesus was not, don't look after the poor. That was not his thing. His whole ministry was looking after the poor. Mary, of course, like all of us, had choices. And there's 4 choices she had. One, she could have... Sorry, I think I'm going to sneeze. Amen. I received that. One, she could have sold it and turned it into cold, hard cash and done something with that cash. 2, she could have saved it as provision for her old age, right? Like when she's old, maybe she didn't get married, she needs money, so she's got this perfume. 3, she could have used it on herself to enhance her beauty. And this could have even been done to enhance her beauty for the Lord. Like she could have spiritualized it. I'm enhancing my beauty for the Lord. She could have spent it on herself. She could have put the perfume on herself to enhance her own beauty. 4, she could have just waited a little bit longer. Maybe someone else would anoint Jesus and she wouldn't have to do it. Maybe she could have kept it and just waited and seen what would happen. But if she waited more than 1 week, Jesus already would have been on the cross. Next week, Jesus was on the cross. This is the week before Jesus is going to the cross. Already Judas is going to betray Jesus to the priests and the Pharisees. And so if she had waited, the cross would have come and Jesus would have been beyond her gift. Was it a waste when I gave up my uni degree and career like I spoke about? Was it a waste when the brilliant young Cambridge scholar Henry Martin, who at the age of 20 had gained the highest award in mathematics the world had to offer? He threw away his prospects in exchange for 7 years of missionary work. And in that 7 years, he translated the New Testament into 3 of Asia's greatest languages. Threw away everything the world had to offer, but translated the New Testament into 3 of Asia's biggest languages. Was it a waste when God sent his Son on the cross for you and me? God is not so economical and utilitarian as we are. Look at his creation. I think God, sometimes like his creation, you think, what a waste, like how many trillion stars are there? Surely he could have just made 1 billion, There is trillions and trillions of stars. Yeah, how many sunsets and sunrises are there? And every one of them different, and some of them are not even observed by us. How many millions and millions of different insects there are, creatures in this world that we're even still discovering now. Maybe no one's ever seen them ever, and God made them. Like this is extravagance of creation. He didn't need to give us colour. We could have had black and white for our world. But he gave us colour. He gave us beauty. He made a beautiful world for us. His creation was extravagant and the gift of his Son was extravagant. Some scientists say that the universe is so big that there must be other things out there, other life out there. And when I asked God about this, he said to me, Chris, the universe is so big because it's made to glorify me. And when you look at the universe, you see how big the God is you serve. An unending universe. It says in Isaiah that not one of the stars is missing. Not one of the stars is missing. Every one of those trillions and trillions of stars has a purpose. And they all hold the galaxy in the universe in perfect balance. The gravity of different stars pulling on each other holds the universe in perfect balance. Not one of them missing in their purpose. Not one of them missing in their purpose. How much do we know of this seemingly wasteful and extravagant expenditure of ourselves in his service out of simple love for him? How real is that in our life? Extravagant service, extravagant giving of our life for him. Or are we stingy and calculating in our self-giving? Proverbs 11:24 says, the world of the generous keeps getting larger and larger, and the world of the stingy keeps getting smaller and smaller. 2 Corinthians 9:6 says, whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, and whoever sows generously will also reap generously. If a farmer gets 10 seeds and he sows them in the ground, he's going to get back what he sowed, right? He's going to reap from those 10 seeds. But if he sows thousands of seeds, he's going to get millions of seeds back because each plant has so many seeds in one plant. In fact, I can't remember the statistics, but just planting one stalk of wheat in a field over 50 years, if it's nourished, I can't remember, but it would feed the whole world. It was just like the way it multiplies is just incredible. I can't remember the exact statistics now. So that was the assessment of the disciples. This is just a waste. It's extravagant. He shouldn't have done it. But look at Mary's own assessment. 2 is her own assessment. And, we read about her assessment in verse, I think it's 3. Verse 3 of chapter 14. While he was in Bethany reclining at the table in the home of Simon the leper, a woman came with an alabaster jar of very expensive perfume made of pure nard. She broke the jar and poured the perfume on his head. This jar was her prized possession. It was most likely an inheritance passed on to her, and she was under no compulsion to expend on the Lord. She could have used it to adorn herself. Are we using God's gifts for our own adornment? The Bible talks quite straight about building our own palaces while the temple of God lies in ruin. And I wonder if we are spending the gifts that God has given us on our own adornment, or we're giving them extravagantly to the Lord and saying, God, use this for your glory. Mary's was spontaneous, uncalculating action of self-forgetful love. she just came and gave it. God, this is everything. I just give it to you because I'm just in love with you, Jesus, and all I want to do is give you everything I have. Her greatest delight was to give her greatest treasure to the one she loved the greatest. Let me say that again. Her greatest delight was to give her greatest treasure to the one she loved the greatest. A missionary lay dying of cancer. Her only daughter was about to sail for the mission field when the cancer struck. Naturally, the daughter wanted to stay and care for her mother in her hour of need. But the mother would have none of it. If she kept her jar of fragrance for herself, the very keeping would have spoilt the fragrance of it. The people in a far-off land without Christ were in a greater need of that sweet fragrance of her daughter's love. She told her daughter to go. Nothing was too precious for her Jesus. And I think how much of what we have spent to adorn ourselves could have done for the kingdom of God. There's this beautiful song, Thank You for Giving to the Lord. And he speaks about when you get to heaven and there's going to be this line of people and they're going to come and say, thank you for giving to the Lord. Because you gave to that missionary, because you gave to that child, because you did this, I'm here in the kingdom of heaven. And we heard that beautiful testimony of Ruth this morning. She gave, and through that gift, God brought Lily and Lexi into the kingdom. And they're here tonight with us. Thank you for giving to the Lord. Thank you. Number 3. Well, Jesus had a few things to say as well. His assessment of the situation. Verses 6 to 9. Leave her alone, said Jesus. Why are you bothering her? She has done a beautiful thing to me. The poor you will always have with you, and you can help them anytime you want, but you will not always have me. She did what she could. She poured perfume on my body beforehand to prepare for my burial. Truly, I tell you, wherever the gospel is preached throughout the world, what she has done will also be told in memory of her. Jesus rebuked the disciples as sharply as they had rebuked Mary. Of course, we care for the poor, but here is the Son of God about to go to the cross, something Mary was unaware of. But Jesus knew that this gift would be with him on that cross. That the aroma of that perfume would still be there to cover the stench of blood and sweat and death upon that cross. Listen to me, that there was a week between this and Jesus on the cross. That perfume wasn't going away in that week. This was the most expensive, pure, undiluted perfume known to man. And when Jesus hung on that cross, come on, and the smell of the blood and the sweat and the death around him was covered by the aroma, the fragrance of that perfume. He even said it there. She did this to prepare me for my burial. Because in those times they would prepare the body. Remember when Jesus was taken down from the cross, they brought the things to prepare him for his burial. She already did it. She had already prepared him, but while he was still alive. And how long do we wait and wait and wait, and the things of God die before we give? And we could have given, and the things of God could have become alive. And Jesus would have smelt that aroma on the cross instead of waiting till he died and went to the grave, and then we want it. Oh, Jesus, let me do something for you now. You know, it's like the sheep and the goats. And, you know, Keith Green sings this song about the sheep and the goats. And there's this guy, and, you know, he's a goat, and he's standing before Jesus, and Jesus said, you never fed me when I was hungry, you never gave me a drink when I was thirsty, and he's going, well, when were you hungry, Jesus? You weren't that crazy person who came to my door, were you? You weren't that homeless person on the street. Hey, does one of the disciples want to get Jesus a hamburger? Come on, just go over to Macca's and grab him a hamburger. Oh, Jesus, you weren't that person in prison, were you? Was I supposed to visit you? Jesus, are you okay? Can I care for you? What can I do for you now? You're like, it'll be too late. It'll be too late. And what we do for the least of one of these, we do for him. And so it's so important to understand that giving extravagantly in God's kingdom is honored above all other things because it is an act of faith. What does God say in Malachi? The only time God tells us to test him is in our giving. Test me in this and see if I will not pour open the floodgates of heaven. The only time God tells us to test him. Giving is something, as I said before, it's a spiritual weapon of warfare that destroys the enemy's province of fear in our life. As Jesus hung on that cross and died for us, the most extravagant gift God could ever give to us, his son on the cross, the most extravagant gift anyone had ever done for Jesus, clung to him as well. So think of that. Here is God, the Son of God, the most extravagant thing that Jesus could do for us, that God could do for us, and the most extravagant gift that anyone did for Jesus was with him on that cross. Isn't that a beautiful picture? That the smell of that perfume, the aroma of that perfume was with Jesus on the cross as he gave extravagantly. That extravagant gift surrounded him. I just think it's a beautiful picture. It's a beautiful picture of what our giving does to God. Jesus said she did what she could. There are many things she couldn't do. And there are many things that we can't do, but there are things that we can do. There are things that we can do. Remember when Jesus asked the disciples to feed the 5,000? And they said, do you want us to spend a year's wages? They had the money. Do you want us to do that? They weren't saying, Jesus, it's going to cost this and we don't have it. They said, do you want us to do it? They had it in the money bag. They had it. Do you want us to spend a year's wages? But the boy, he brought what he had. Everything he had. And it wasn't a year's wages. It was, 5 measly little loaves and 2 small fish, his lunch. And he gave it everything he had. He said, here it is, Jesus. You see the difference? The disciples could have done something. They had the cash. They could have given it. It wasn't even theirs, It was Jesus's sitting in the... Do you want us to do that? But here's the little boy. He did what he could. He didn't have enough food to feed that crowd, but he brought what he had and he gave it. And Mary, she couldn't stop Jesus going to the cross. She couldn't save him from the cross, and God didn't want her to do that, but she gave what she could. The perfume, the aroma, the fragrance that was with him on that cross, that hid the stink of sweat and blood and death. She gave what she could. She poured her perfume on his head as an act of love. Christ's prediction in verse 9 that this would be told wherever the gospel is preached has been wonderfully fulfilled. And I love this. Implicit in Jesus' statement is this invincible confidence that Jesus' disciples were to go over the whole world. Listen to that. Truly I tell you, wherever the gospel is preached throughout the world, what she has done will be told. Here's Jesus and he's speaking what you're going to do. The whole world is going to hear about me. I haven't seen this before, but when I was reading this, it just became so apparent. There's this invincible confidence in Jesus that his stories are going to go to the whole world. Come on, he hasn't told them yet to go and make disciples of all nations. The Holy Spirit hasn't been promised to them yet. Here he is saying, this is going to be told to the whole world. There's this invincible confidence in him that Jesus would carry, his disciples would carry into the whole world. And we are the beneficiaries of that promise. Come on, we are the beneficiaries of that promise. It's like that gift of perfume didn't only go to Jesus on the cross. It reaches out to us over 2,000 years of history, and it is we are the beneficiaries of that promise, that this will be told all over the world. Isn't it beautiful? The fragrance from that broken jar not only reached Jesus on the cross, it reached out over 2,000 years and touched us. Her act won no applause from her companions. But to her beloved master, it was a refreshing oasis in the midst of the desert of man's indifference and hatred. Remember, this is sandwiched between the Pharisees and the chief priests planning how to betray and kill Jesus, and Judas's actual betrayal of him. Right in the middle of man's indifference and hatred is this woman's gift, this oasis in this desert. Have we offered a gift, done an act, emptied our jar of perfume out of pure love for him alone? This he treasures more than all our acts of service, for it is the love behind the service that makes the fragrance. For it is the love behind the service that makes the fragrance.